Hey guys, my name is Titus and this is Draw Near Moment, that moment of the week where we draw near to Christ together. Now if you've ever thought to yourself, I am so tired of my life, I just want to wreck it, destroy it, mess it up, this is the episode for you. Before we dive in, I feel like I need to comment a little bit on my facial region. I got a little bit of boy band going on up the top, and then down south I got a little bit of Scruff McGruff. I don't know, I don't have an explanation for it. I've just been enjoying letting my facial hair and my hair just fly out. It's been great. So maybe this weekend I'll do something about it, but I am looking forward to No Shave November. Hope you participate. Anyway, we're going to jump into this. We're talking about how to wreck a life. Now, truthfully, I don't think anyone wants to wreck their life. I don't think anyone would even think that people want to wreck their life. But the truth is, people do it all the time. Without meaning to, step by step, they wreck their life. You probably know somebody who, you've been watching them, you've been watching all the stuff that they've been doing, and you've been seeing how things played out, and finally they're at the end of all of this, and they're wondering why people don't want to talk to them, why people don't trust them, and all these kind of things. And when they talk to you about it, you're like, yeah, that's crazy. But in your mind, you're like, I kind of get it. You've kind of been on a path here. No one ever intends to wreck their life, but it happens all the time. Now we're going to look at a character named David. David is awesome. He's one of my favorite Bible characters, except for this story. We're going to look into his little bit of dirty laundry today. See, he was a king, obviously, but he did a lot of awesome things. David and Goliath, he was the guy who danced in the streets. I mean, he was just an awesome guy. But it seems like later in his life, not quite at the end, he just kind of decides to mess it all up, and it doesn't really make any sense. But it kind of does when you start looking at it. So we're going to take a look at that right now. And I'll make some comments to help connect the dots along the way. So we're in 2 Samuel 11. It says, in the spring, at the time when kings normally go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army, and they destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained in Jerusalem. So that's really important right there. This is how it all began. Now, I told you already, he's going to wreck his life. And that's the whole point of this. This is how it began. You see, at the very beginning, it says, at the time when kings normally go off to war. And it says, but David stayed at home. See, David would normally be going off to war at this point. But maybe he was at this point in his life where he felt like he had already had all the success, and he felt like he could just kind of take a breather, rest, and all that stuff, and just kind of live, just enjoy life for a little bit. But for whatever reason, he decides to, all stay at home. And it's an interesting thing, but the reason why I want to point this out, and this is really important, is that a lot of times, it's when we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing that it leads to our biggest mistake. Now, not always, but a lot of times kids get in the most trouble during summer. They have school, but then they have summer, this big block of time where their parents are at home and all this stuff, and they're just kind of go wild. Or maybe, someone got unemployed and they're out at work for a couple months, and they kind of meet up with some people they shouldn't be hanging out with, or what have you. It's in those moments when we're kind of off that beaten path that a lot of times will lead to our biggest mistakes. And that's what happens to David here. Now we're going to keep continuing. Oh, one other important fact before we do. He was probably bored. And guys do stupid things when they're bored. So anyway, let's jump back into it. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing, and she was very beautiful. Now, a lot of people like to think that this girl's a hussy. She's a she-devil. What's she doing bathing on a roof? She was asking for it. Use that kind of terminology. But really, this wasn't unnormal at all. In fact, most people took baths on the roof because you're on a roof. People couldn't really see what's going on. Except if you're in a palace way up top, which kind of points to the problem here. See, I don't think this was unintentional, David. I don't think he just kind of stumbled up on there. Oh, I'm on the roof. Oh, wow. I kind of wonder if he knew what he was going to be seeing when he got down there. Or he knew that maybe there was a possibility of what he might be seeing. And again, he's taking another step. Let's keep going. And then David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah. So she's married. That's important. Uriah the Hittite. And then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Oh, gross. This is one of your favorite Bible characters? Titus, this is this guy's kind of a jerk. Like, what kind of a king would abuse his power like this? This guy doesn't sound too great, but you have to look that there's steps along the way, and this is definitely some dirty laundry in David's past. But here's what I want to point out, that you might think, well, okay, well, he did the deed, it's all done, story over, right? Well, the story's done. Like, this is it. This is where it ends. It's awful, bad story, but it doesn't end there. It gets more interesting if you're watching a soap opera, and frightening if you realize this is real life. And in verse, verse 5, it says, then she went back home. The woman conceived, and she sent word to David saying, I am pregnant. Like, that just got complicated. She's got a husband, all this stuff, and you're the king, you abused your power. This is getting south real fast. Like, this isn't good. And well, so let's just keep moving on. Sorry, I want to point this out, because this is really interesting. So David has an opportunity here. He could be a man, he could be like a leader and be like, I've messed up, guys. Like, I made a huge mistake, and this is totally my fault. I'm going to make amends and try to fix the problem, which I never can, but, I'm the leader here. The buck stops with me. This is all my fault. But that wouldn't be fun, would it? Nobody does that, and neither does David here, because he, like many of us believe, as long as nobody knows, it's like it doesn't happen, right? It didn't happen if nobody knows. We'll keep on continuing with that. So David sent the word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite, and Joab sent him to David. So remember Uriah the Hittite? It's Bathsheba's husband. This is getting a little weird. Now he's meeting with her husband. When Uriah the Hittite came to David, David asked him, how's Joab? How are the soldiers' word? How's the war going? He's just making casual talk, and just you just want to punch David in the face. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house, wash your feet. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all of his master's servants and did not go down to his house. Now this is important. This is what David's plan is. He's like, if I can get him off the battle lines, get him home, he won't know it's not his baby. But Uriah's a good guy. He doesn't, we're going to find out why he's doing this in a second, but he doesn't go home. So let's figure out why. David was told Uriah did not go home. This is in verse 10, by the way. So he asked Uriah, haven't you just come home from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home? Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How can I go to my house and eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I would not do such a thing. Then David said to him, stay here one more day, and tomorrow I will send you back. And so Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, again, David's trying to cover this up. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him. Then David made him drunk, but that evening Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants, and he did not go home. Now, this whole story is incredibly messed up. But it's about to take even an extra level of messed up. How far David is willing to go to cover his sin, to hide what he had done. That morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. He wrote in it, put Uriah out in front where the fighting is the fiercest, then withdraw from him, so he will be struck down and die. So he gives him a letter, and it's his death sentence. It's Uriah's death sentence. He says, hey, Uriah, could you give Joab this for me? Like, that's really awkward. This is so messed up. And the plan is like, hey, when you're charging, make sure he's out in front where, the big, tough defender guys are. And then when he starts charging, have everyone else pull back so he'll go out and just to his death. Jacked up. So messed up. And that's basically, let's just read the end here and then we'll get to some conclusions. So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at the place where he knew the defenders were strong, or the strongest defenders were. And when the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. So then after this, he marries Bathsheba, and all of it's said and done, right? Story is done. He marries Bathsheba again to hide his sin. No one needs to know. Let's keep this quiet. But the whole thing ends, the very last part of the chapter ends with this idea that God sees, that God saw it and he was displeased. Now, the whole thing doesn't mention God at all, but it's at the very end that it's like, oh, wait, we forgot about God in this whole situation. And he saw the whole thing, and he wasn't going to let it go so easily. Now, this can be a frightening fact if you are kind of being like a David right now, which typically can be a good thing, but in this case, not so much. Or it can be a relieving fact if you've been working and working and working and serving and serving and serving, and then it's that fact that God has been watching you all along and he will reward your efforts. It can be a relieving thing, but there's a couple of things that I want to mention as we wrap up. So you might want to know what happened to David after all this. And I can guarantee you, if we asked David, was this worth it? All this stuff, was it worth it? I can guarantee he would say, absolutely not. This was a bad call in my book. No, it wasn't worth it at all. Because this moment pretty much cost David everything. I mean, not everything, but a lot of things. See, because what happens after this is God releases his judgment. So basically God's so David gets redeemed, God restores him, redeems him, all that stuff, but God wasn't going to let it just completely slide. So he's like, that baby, that one that Bathsheba's pregnant with, he's going to die. He or it or she or whatever is going to die. And you might think, well, that's not fair. The baby didn't do anything wrong. Why would God allow the baby to die? And I would agree with you to a point. But here's the distinction. Sometimes you aren't the one that has to pay for your sin. Sometimes you aren't the one that is truly impacted by your sin. Sometimes it's your children. Sometimes it's your friends. Sometimes it's your family. Someone else has to pick up the bill for what you did. And that's a scary fact. And David, fights with God over this, no, don't let the child die. Take my life instead. But God won't hear it. His decision was made. And it's messed up, but it's true. Sometimes you aren't the one that has to pay for it. And some people like to say this, they like to do this thing where, if God forgives and if he's all loving and all kind and all this stuff, then I'll just do whatever I want and then I'll just pray to God at the end of the night, before I die, God, please forgive me, and all be said and done. But here's the distinction. Just because God forgives doesn't mean people do. There are some people that will never forgive your actions, even if God does. The courts won't forgive your actions. Police officers aren't going to be like, well, he's a believer now, we'll just let it slide. No, that's not how it works. Some people will never let go what you've done. And it doesn't happen, or that's how it happens for David too. See, one of his sons decides to rebel, not he just leaves home, he decides that he wants to kill his father and take the throne. And then not only that, one of David's close friends, one of his advisors, was Bathsheba's grandfather. And you can imagine when he found out about all this, what happened? He wasn't a David fan anymore. In fact, he decided to help his son revolt. It was a nasty thing. Tons of people died, including David's son. Now, he got past it, but it was an awful thing. There were still consequences. God redeemed him. God still loved him, and he's still the man after God's own heart, but he still had to deal with the mess that he created. But here's the most amazing thing. At the end of David's life, after all of it's said and done, the next king in line is Solomon. Now, this is just powerful if you really think about what it means. Solomon was Bathsheba's son. Now, you might think, what? Why would her son be the next king? This is a chapter in David's life that's terrible. He did some incredibly awful things. This doesn't make any sense. Couldn't it have been any of his other sons. Why Solomon? And I had a hard time struggling with this. God, why would you allow Solomon to be it? Because clearly he shouldn't have been. But this is the amazing thing. And this is something I believe for anybody. God has a way of picking up the pieces of our broken lives and putting them back together. You see, he's the master improviser. He can improvise with our sin. He can fix, or he can not necessarily fix it, but he can put the pieces back in a way to make something beautiful come back. And here's the other amazing thing. David was a murderer, an adulterer, and did some incredibly awful things in this passage. But God forgave them, redeemed them, and put the pieces back together. And I could think of no more amazing way to show that God is the master improviser than the son that he never should have had being the king. So maybe you feel like your life is too broken. Maybe you feel like you've just gone too far. Your life is too much of a mess. Not even God can pick up the pieces. But I can tell you, if he could do it for David, he can do it for you. So I would just say, man, turn to God. You have to do a 180. That's what David did. He's like, I have done wrong. Like even in the moment, like he didn't quite understand what all he'd done. He didn't understand the repercussions of it all. But then finally when he did, it was like I don't even deserve to live. Like, it was an awful, awful thing that he'd done. But God picked up the pieces, restored him, and God put it back together and made something beautiful. And he can do the same thing for you. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Draw Near Moment. Now, this is a message that, I don't know, I hope that it was really helpful for you, because this is a message that's been on my heart for years. Literally, I've taught this message a couple times to our youth group at church and just different places, and I don't know, it's just something that God won't let me let go. So I hope that it was helpful for you. I hope it was meaningful, and I don't know, it just speaks to me, and I hope it speaks to you. So as always, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. The support is always really, really nice, and you can also help support me more by hitting the subscribe button below. It'll help you be in tune with the stuff that I'm doing and all that good stuff. And you can also leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought. Thank you for all you guys have been doing, and I will see you next week for another episode of Draw Near Moment. See ya.